Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome to Fleet PvP 102. This is a class I've been kind of mulling over doing for a while. We teach Intro to Fleets every few weeks here in the uni, but I figured we need something that's another step up from that. Intro to Fleets is a wonderful class. If you haven't taken it yet, I highly recommend you take it. It'll help you learn how to PvP or join fleets and get really comfortable with that. But there's a lot to learn after that. I put this class together as basically a bunch of ideas of different things that you can do while you're out in space in a fleet, PvPing, to just become a better fleet member, a better pilot, help you prepare for more roles in the future, and such. So I'm going to cover a lot of kind of random tips and tricks in this class. I tried to make sure that it flows logically, but as a whole, this class is mostly going to be a collection of a bunch of here's a little thing you can do to make your experience better. So what are we looking at today? I've broken this down into 3 different parts. First, we're going to go over some notions of flying your own ship. When I say this, I don't mean manual piloting. This isn't a manual piloting class. I'm not going to be covering how to do that, but other things that you can do with your own ship that will be useful to know. We're going to talk about intel for a bit. I really like gathering intel while I'm out on fleets, and there's a million different ways you can get intel in Eve. So we're going to talk about some of those ways that you can get and share intel. And then we'll talk about specific roles a bit. The specific roles we're going to talk about are DPS and Logi. I thought this class was already getting a bit long content-wise, so I didn't put anything in here about Bouchers, really. We will talk about bubbles for a bit, but specialty roles are not covered so much here. So let's jump into it. Fly your own ship. As I said, this is not manual piloting, but the idea here is that the things I'm going to talk about are things that will make life a little bit easier for you or help you do better than just anchoring on your FC and then pressing F1 on enemies, or orbiting your enemies at 500 and pressing F1. So we're going to look at a few different tips and tricks. First thing I want you to be aware of is timers. This is something that can be confusing to people when they first start PvPing, and you'll see it happen a lot with gates. Timers are very important when we get to gates. 2 types of timers you want to be aware of. The first one is a weapons timer. Weapons timer happens anytime you take an offensive action. So if you shoot an enemy ship, if you send your drones at an enemy ship, if you scram them, if you point them, if you paint them, if you're flying a link ship and you fire off links, all of these will give you a 60-second weapons timer. When that weapons timer happens, you cannot jump through a gate. You can go through wormholes if you're fighting on a wormhole, that's different. But if you're on a gate, you cannot jump it. So lots of times you will be in fleets and you will see an enemy land right next to you on a gate. And your FC will tell you, do not shoot them. And this is the big reason why here, is because if you shoot an enemy, they can just jump through the gate and run away from you. So we always end up having a bit of a standoff on gates to see who's going to engage first, who is going to get the weapons timer. Oh yes, good call out here in chat as well. Yes, you also cannot dock or get tether. So weapons timers stop you from escaping to safety, basically. You can still warp away if you're not pointed. But yeah, weapons timers are something we really want to be aware of when we're PvPing if we're on a gate, because people can just stop fighting and jump through the gate and get away. The other timer you want to be aware of is the log off timer. There's one that shows up for NPCs. If you've been shooting rats, it's yellow. You don't have to worry about that one. But, well, you might if you're doing that, I guess. But for this context, we're talking the red one, the log off timer. This is a 15-minute long timer, and this happens anytime after any kind of PvP, whether you are the aggressor or the victim. So if somebody shoots at you, you do not get a weapons timer, but you do get a log off timer. This can be annoying because, especially here in the uni, we really like to do filament fleets where we take a filament. And when you are trying to filament, you cannot have a timer. So if you get shot, you cannot use a filament to escape for the next 15 minutes. And you also cannot log off safely in space. Your ship will stay behind if you log off. So a lot of what we're doing when we're out in space is we're managing these timers. We're thinking of these when we're choosing actions. For example, maybe we're out on a PvP fleet, we've been killing Ishtars, we've been fighting other fleets, we are getting kind of low, it's slowing down, there's not much content around, so we say, okay, we're going to filament. We have 2 minutes on our timer. We go to take that break, and then we see a venture come by. If I'm the one FCing, I will say, guys, leave the venture alone. We're not going to shoot a venture. We're not going to risk a 2-minute or a full 15-minute timer for a venture kill. Enemies can also make use of this too, right? If we're preparing to filament away and an enemy just shoots somebody once, then we can't filament for 15 minutes. There are some other things that come up in here. Logi copy timers generally. So if you are in a Logi ship and you use your reps, your heals on somebody that has a 12-minute timer left, you will get a 12-minute timer. If they've got a 3-minute timer left, you will get a 3-minute timer. So generally, you're safe to heal people as long as they're in your fleet because you'll be stuck in the same position they are, but you can always play it safe. And yes, there are also ways that Logi reps mess around with suspect and criminal status too. Oh, and a very good call out there too, bubbles. So bubbles from interdictors like sabers, they do not cause a weapons timer. So that's why sabers are so good on gates, because they can just put a bubble up, jump through a gate, then put a bubble up on the other side, and that will trap people. Yes, something really, I put this first because I think it's so important to be aware of, is the importance of timers. So many times you will be in a fleet and you will not be engaging an enemy, and it is because the FC is thinking about the timers involved. So yeah, don't shoot things unless your FC tells you to. There. Bookmarks. This is a big one I wanted to talk about. We do have a bookmark class here in the uni that covers a lot of bookmarks. I want to cover the ones we use more in PvP specifically. Just a general idea of how to use bookmarks better is if you press the L button when you're in game, it'll open a window, and then if there's a little pop out there that will do a locations in system. So if you press L, it'll pop up this window, and if you press that little arrow in the upper right corner, this will pop out a new small window that will have all bookmarks in your current system. So you can put that somewhere on your screen, and you can see that for easy warping too. There are something called shared folders in Eve for bookmarks. You can have shared ones with other people. You can have up to 3 different shared folders online at any time, and you can have 30 different folders offline. So you can connect and disconnect to different folders as you need to. Uni has a bunch of different ones for different regions. Our Wormhole campus uses one. Our Nullsec campus, when we had one, used one. Actually, we had like 20 different folders in Nullsec campus, honestly. There's a Uni Small Gang one a lot of us use when we're roaming around. There's the Eve Scout Thera one, which is wonderful for getting through Thera or Turner. We've got a Pochvin folder here in Uni. Depending on if you're in a different corp too, they might have different ones for local areas. So it's very good to get those shared bookmarks so that you can find the locations they're talking about in there. The bookmarks can be shared in chat. You can just drag these folders into chat and then people can click them. Very handy. It's also good to make your own bookmarks. To make your own bookmark, you just press Control B, and then you can pick to save it in default or a folder of your own or a shared folder. Depending on how organized you are, you might have different folders. As you can see in this screenshot, I only have a default personal one. I haven't bothered making subfolders for myself. There's that person, I think they're a Unistar. They have a Uni character. They bookmarked every system in the game and every gate. They wrote blog posts about it. They were mentioned by CCP and some dev talks and stuff. I'm sure they have some very organized personal folders. I think they hit the cap of personal bookmarks even. It's like 3,000 maybe. We'll cover types of bookmarks on the next slide, but as a whole, yeah, bookmarks super useful to have. Good to make your own different types and make sure you have shared folders online. So what are the types of bookmarks? There's a bunch of different ones. As it relates to PvP, big one to know about is safes. A safe is any bookmark that is not on grid with something. So if you warp between 2 things and you make a bookmark in the middle, we can call that a safe. It might not be a great safe. It might be something that enemies can easily descan or that They might be able to land close to you if they warp at the same speed and they make the same bookmark. They might be able to do that, but they work in a pinch. To make a safe, you just warp between two things, you press Control B, and you make sure you hit submit when you're not close to either of the things. There's a better type of safe that's called a deep safe. A deep safe is something that is more than 14.3 AU from any celestial or warpable object. Some people will say these are ones further out. Sometimes, depending on the size of the system, you could make a deep safe within a system as well. So these are things that if someone is trying to descan you from a planet or a moon or a gate, they'll never be able to find you unless they're descanning while they're warping around. There's different ways to make deep safes. You can make them by warping to your own safes and going at weird angles on long warps. There is something you can do with abyssals and downtime to create a deep safe in that way. There's incursions. When incursions are in an area, they spawn very far out and you can warp to them to make deep safes. Lots of people have good legacy deep safes, but as a whole, it's just a safe that is not in descan range of other stuff. If you make a safe that's within 5 AU of a gate, then anyone coming through the gate is going to know that they know you're there. They might not be able to warp to you, but they know you're around. With a deep safe, at least you're further out. Instadocks. You will hear about instadocks. So when you warp to a station and press dock, you'll notice that sometimes you land a little far from the station and it takes 10 seconds before you get in the docking ring and your ship actually docks up. There is a risk with that. There's the risk that something grabs you or bushes you away right before you dock up. So an instadock is a bookmark that's made usually right on top of a station's undock. Maybe it's above the station or below the station. But it's a bookmark that's made within the circle of the station so that when you warp to it, you will actually be able to instantly dock up. Uni has these in some of our folders for things like the Jita Trade Hub or different systems. I know if you go into Wormhole Campus, they've got their headquarters there. Bicentennial Hall is right at the top of the list for an instadock. Yeah. If you're in a small ship and it's not a busy system, most of the time you can warp right to a station and dock fine, but an instadock will be slightly quicker and it's safer. So instadocks are useful to have. You can do a little trick with this too, where if you are warping to an instadock while you're in warp, you have your destination set to that station. If you turn on autopilot, it will actually dock you up as soon as you get there first thing. Autopilot, generally a horrible feature, not one you want to use. It's not that useful except for instadocks. Instadock is a great time to use autopilot. If you're shuttling in high sec or something, maybe. No, I don't want to talk about autopilot. On the other side of the instadock, you'll see insta undocks. Insta undocks are something that is in line with the undock so that when you come out of your station, you can instantly warp to it. These are very useful for if a station is camped. So if we're at war and you're trying to undock in Jita and there's enemies outside, if you undock and then try to warp to the Sobaseki gate or the New Caldari gate, your ship's going to turn and it might take 5 seconds to align and warp. And in that 5 seconds, you could get tackled and killed. An insta undock is one that's right in line. So when you undock, you're already aligned to it and you can warp to it right away. We do have these, again, I think the Stackman folder for Uni has some insta undocks in it. So as soon as you undock, you can just warp to that. You go from being invincible or untargetable to in warp, and nothing can stop you apart from a bubble. So yes, we do say that, during wartime, be careful in Jita, but if you're using an insta undock, you're generally pretty safe to at least get off the undock. To make these can be a little tricky. There is a little variance when you undock of what angle you're exactly going at, but generally if you undock and kind of make sure you're going in a straight line and burn out a couple 100 kilometers, that can work. The other ones that you will hear about are tacks and perches. Tack is like a tactical bookmark. I use it to mean the same thing as a perch. Some people prefer one term or the other. Maybe some people distinguish between the two, but to me they're the same. A tack or a perch is a bookmark close to where you want to be fighting or close to your point of interest. It's on grid with it, but it's more than 150 kilometers away. And this is so that you can warp to that and then you can warp to what you're interested in. So for example, if we're going to be fighting at a gate. If we think a fight might happen at a gate, we might want to have a tactical bookmark 500 kilometers off the gate. So then we can warp to that and back as we need to. Key thing for attack or perch is don't put them close to or under 150 kilometers from the thing you want. Right? You need to be at least 150 kilometers to warp. It takes a little bit of speed and time to align. There's a little bit of wiggle of a few kilometers. So any tactical that's under 160 kilometers is probably wasted. There is fancy stuff you can do if you have a whole grid of them, like if you've been to a structure bash and you've seen how people set them up on structures. But yeah, as a whole, try and make sure that you're at least 200 kilometers away from what you're doing. I took this screenshot just to show a few examples. This is JITA for me with the folders I had online at the time. So you can see I had a JITA instadock. I had a undock from Kiakte's fleets that I've stolen. I have 3 different undocks. I have Yuri's compromised safe. I have my own safe. Or no, this is not my own safe. This is from the Uni Small Gang folder. And then I have a tactical for the new Kaldari. So there's a bunch of different ones. You might hear people call the instadocs at 0 kilometer as well. Sometimes you'll see a bookmark that's called something with 0 kilometer. So if you see G to 44 0 kilometers, that probably means it's an instadoc. But yeah, the insta undock is the most useful one to have for sure. And it's good to have a few. And yes, I did not have the Stackman folder online here because yes, the Stackman folder does have some instadocs and insta undocs both. Yeah, I was using some different ones here. So yeah, as a whole, different types of bookmarks. Safes are always great to have. Deep safes, if you can make them, are wonderful. Instadocs and insta-undocs are good to have in locations where you are a lot. You know, if you're just in some random nullsec you're roaming through, you don't really need those because you probably can't dock anyways. And yeah, gate tacks and perches are super useful if fighting's breaking out. So yes, if you ever hear an FC tell a scout, can you burn me some tacks? That's what they mean. They're not talking about like taxation. They're talking about make me some tactical bookmarks. Bubbles. So we do have an introduction to interdiction class. It hasn't been run in a while, but we have an interdiction class and we have a bubbles class. So I'm not going to go into all of the details on bubbles here. This is one part of a larger class here. But just some things to be aware of are some different types of bubbles. Very quick, if you're not familiar, a bubble stops you from warping. If you are in a bubble, you cannot warp out. And if you are warping to somewhere in line with a bubble, you will probably land in it. Lots of distinctions to make here. I'll go through a quick few of them. So there's a few types of bubbles. Catch and drag bubbles, as you can see in this image here. Basically, when you are warping to a target, if there is a bubble within 500 kilometers of the landing point that is in line with your warp, then you can land in it. So if, for example, in this screenshot, we are coming from the exact right of it here. We're over here on the right and we are warping to the gate. A catch bubble is one that is between us and the gate. So if we warp in, we will land right here. One sec, can I do a pen? I can do a pen. Okay, so if we are warping in here with a catch bubble, we will land right here at the edge of this bubble. When we land here, we cannot warp to the gate because there's a bubble between us. So we will have to actually turn on our micro warp drives and burn through or get around, or we just turn and warp away the other way. This is called a catch bubble. These are set up between us and the gate. There's also a weirdness though with bubbles with a drag bubble. So if there is a bubble behind the thing that you're warping to, you will actually get pulled to it. So if we are here and we are warping to this gate, we're trying to get there, it will actually pull us through and we will land here. We will land at the edge of the drag bubble. Even though it's further out than we're going to warp, because it's within 500 kilometers in that line, we will land at the edge of this bubble. Drag bubbles are annoying, but at least with a drag bubble, you can turn around and micro warp drive to the gate. Usually a drag bubble will be like 50 kilometers off or 100 kilometers off. Because if this drag bubble was 300 off over here, then when we land, we could just warp back to the gate instantly. So just something to be aware of with bubbles is that it's not about being right on the gate. There will be bubbles in front of the gate or behind the gate. Now, how can you get around these? Is you just go with different angles. So for example, if you watch my scouting class in it, so at one point there's a gate that's bubbled. It's got a bubble on one side. So I warp to a structure that's like up here. So I just warp over there, and then from there I can warp safely down to the gate with no risk of a bubble. This is something that takes a little practice to do. You got to look in space, align yourself, get all that figured out. So yeah, basics of what I'm saying here. A catch bubble is one that's between you and the target. A drag bubble is behind the target and will pull you there. There's a lot of chatter going on in the questions chat, but I think it's just people just chit-chatting, right? There's nothing vital in here. Yeah, okay, we're good. Yeah, it's bubbles have roughly a 500 kilometer range. There's a discussion about this a while back and where exactly the 500 is, if it's from the edge of the bubble or the center. I don't recall the answer, and I don't want to get into semantics. Just know if there's a bubble within a couple hundred kilometers of in line with where you're warping, you will land in that. And yes, you land at the edge of a bubble. So like I said, you will land here at the edge, or you will land here at the edge. One important thing to note, I think I have here, yes, your landing spot is determined when you click the warp button. So if you are warping to a gate, and if you click warp, and 2 seconds after you click warp, a bubble goes up, you're fine. You will go right through the bubble. The game determines exactly where you're going to land the second you press warp. So this is also useful to know as a bubbler. So if you are sitting in a bubbler on a gate and you see an enemy on D-scan and you put up a bubble, it's probably too late. The enemy is probably going to land at the gate anyways and ignore your bubble. There's a question, a couple questions. Would the anchoring skill allow you to create a bubble camp? Yes, yes. So there are anchorable bubbles. For gate camps and bubble camps, anchor bubbles are definitely the better way to go. So with those, if you have just a few points in the anchoring skill and you have the space in your inventory, you can fly out with a bubble in your inventory and you can just anchor it. At our old Nullset campus, we used to take out Instalock thrashers, and they could fit one small bubble in them. So we'd have each of our thrashers would come out and they bring a small bubble. They would go, you right click it in your inventory, you select launch. Key thing to know with anchorable bubbles is you press the launch from your inventory, it will show up in space as a little box. Then you have to right click it and you select anchor. If you don't select anchor, it's just going to sit there and do nothing. You need to actually right click anchor. But yes, if you are doing a gate camp, I would recommend using anchored bubbles and not dictor bubbles, because anchor bubbles are up for hours. They're permanent. They're easy. You don't rely on reaction time of sabers. There's a question, what's the minimal distance for warping? So you have to be 150 kilometers to warp. You can do some tricky things like warp to something that's 150 kilometers away at range so that you warp shorter, but as a whole, something has to be 150 kilometers from you to warp to it. But yeah, like I said, there is the aligning as well. So if you are exactly 150 kilometers away from something and you try to warp to it, your ship will turn and start moving towards it, and then you might be 149 kilometers, and then you're too close to warp. But yeah, if you have other questions about bubbles, feel free to ask. Like I said, I don't think we've taught the bubble class in a while, so I know it's a gap that people might have questions on. So after you've made your bookmarks, another good thing to know about is bouncing. You will hear FCs tell you to bounce at times. If you are flying a KSG, for example, you should know how to bounce. If you are flying in the shrink-wrapped Fun Ink fleets, bouncing is very important in those. If you fly in our FLF fleets, bouncing is important there. Bouncing basically means you warp away and come back. So if you're flying a small ship and people are shooting at you, but you are not tackled, if you're able to warp, bouncing is when you just warp off and come back. So they will lose their lock and they'll shoot somebody else instead of you. This is very useful, especially if you're flying Ewar. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But bouncing is very useful just to keep yourself alive. So we're in a fight, we're all shooting. You notice that a couple people have started shooting at your Merlin, but nobody's tackled your Merlin. So you just warp off. You find something close, you warp to it, and then you warp back. And in that time, they've stopped shooting you and they're shooting somebody else, so you get to live and you get to keep fighting. To bounce, you can warp to anything. Generally, you want to warp to something close. If you're bouncing off something that's like 100 AU away, it's going to take you forever to warp there and back. But if you can bounce off a tactical, stay on grid, that's wonderful. If you can bounce off something that's only an AU away, maybe that's easier. When I bounce, I usually try to make a bookmark as I'm warping out, and then I come back at it. Depending on what you're fighting, though, this might differ here. You can always ask, too. If you are bouncing, you can say, FC, who's a good warp in? This is okay. I know in Intro to Fleets, I talk about combat comms and how you shouldn't be talking much during fights. Asking for a good warp in is an okay thing to ask during combat. You can speak up and just say, who's a good warp in? As an FC, I like to hear that because I know, hey, that means somebody's coming back. That means I didn't lose this person. They didn't die. They're coming back. They're going to fight some more. Key thing to think of, though, is bubbles. So if we are fighting, and even if we're outside bubbles, but we're next to bubbles, when you bounce, you might come back and land in a bubble. So you got to be careful of that. You also have to be paying very close attention. I have had times where I bounced and I died because when I came back, the whole fleet had left. So I warp away, and as I'm warping back, the FC says, scatter, everybody run away, we're not going to fight. And then I come back and I'm the only one there and they kill me and I die. So good things to know. Bouncing, very useful skill. Warp away and come back. Just be careful of making sure you're safe to warp back in. Okay, the sun. So sun is a very important thing to think of when we're doing aligning. I personally love to tell people to align to the sun when we're in KSG, for example, and we need to be aligned out somewhere. The sun is an easy thing to align to because there's a sun in every system. There's a star in every system, I guess we should say. Technically, let's be correct here. Every system has a star. You can always align to the star. However, I don't recommend warping to the star because it is a common spot that people know about for camping or for escaping. I was in a bomber's bar fleet once where we got counter dropped, and our blobs pilot decided to warp the fancy 2 billion-isk blobs to the sun to try and escape. But when they got to the sun, there were enemies there waiting for them. Don't go to the sun. The sun is a great spot to align to because of clusters. When you are anywhere in a system and you look in space towards the sun, you will see there are usually some combat sites around it, there are some planets, there are other things in line with the sun. So if you are in a fight and you think that you might need to warp out, if you're looking for something easy to align to, the star is the easiest thing to align to. Just don't actually warp to it. So what I'll do, if I'm in a fight and I'm not in a brawling ship, or if it looks like we're about to scatter, I will align myself to the star, and then as soon as I want to get out, I'll warp to this planet, or I'll warp to this planet, or this one. Or maybe there's a combat site that's right here, or there's a mining site that's right here. Because you're already aligned over here, and these are within a small degree, you will almost instantly warp if you go to any of those. So use the sun as an align point, but don't actually warp to it because enemies always warp to the sun to look for you. And if you're in Pochman specifically, the sun is pretty deadly in Pochman. That's where big fleets of NPC ships go to fight each other. Some of them will instantly point you and shoot you. So if anyone has not that much experience with Pochman, number one tip in Pochman, don't warp to the sun. If you're out in normal spots in K-space, you can warp to the sun, but you might find some enemies there. So be ready to bounce. If you get to the sun, warp somewhere else quick. Okay. I want to talk also about the difference between a point and a scram. This is something I've seen come up on a few fleets lately, and quite honestly, I have probably been on like 50 PvP fleets before I fully understood this difference. Let's pretend I didn't say 50. Let's pretend I said 10. Yeah, I was on only 10 fleets and then I figured it out. A point is something to stop enemy ships from warping. Okay, when we use a point, which is called a warp disruptor, it will stop an enemy ship from warping away. They usually have a range of 20 to 30 kilometers, depending on what the ship is. 20 is the default. Some ships are bonused for 30. Then you get some crazy ones like the Orthrus and such that can point you at 40 or 50 even. These will stop a ship from warping. Just because there are a few exceptions to the rule. If you fit a warp core stabilizer in your lows, or if you're an adventure or a capital ship, these need more than just a point. A point alone won't stop them. If you look at a point has a strength of 1. Most ships, 1 scram strength will stop a ship from warping. It won't stop a venture, it won't stop a capital, and if someone activates their warp core, it won't stop them. The other difference, though, is a scram. Scrams are much more powerful. Okay? A scram stops the warp, but it also turns off people's micro warp drive. And this is the huge difference here. So we were in a fleet, I think, last week, and there was a fast-moving enemy ship out there, and we were trying to catch it, and people were calling point on it, but it was still burning away from us, and nobody was on top of it. And the FC said, I need a scram on that. Somebody scram it. Because the scram will actually shut off its micro warp drive, stop it from being able to escape, and will stay on top of it. A scram has a strength of 2. Oop, you can't see that now that I just wrote over it. But yes, strength of 2 on a scram, so that will shut off the micro warp drive. A few other things with this. Scrams have shorter range. As you can see, 7,500 versus the 20. So a scram is much less range. There are ships that have bonuses to scram. So like an interceptor. If someone's in a malediction, assume that they can point you at 30 kilometers and they can scram you at 10 or 11 kilometers. So a little further out. You'll also hear the term scram pass. This is a bit more advanced manual piloting technique. A scram pass is when a ship will fly past somebody and they will just scram them just very quick. They'll get within 10 kilometers, they'll scram them, and they'll leave. And they do that just to shut off the micro warp drive. So if there's a fast-moving enemy ship, our scout just goes by it very quick, and they just hit it with scram for like 1 second. That micro warp drive shut off, the enemy ship is now slowed down, and the rest of our fleet can get on top and they can get their scrams on it. Scramming is dangerous as a whole because you do have to be so much closer. If you are getting in scram range with enemies, it is much easier for them to hurt you. So yeah, scramming is a bit more dangerous to do, but it's much more beneficial for shutting off the micro warp drive and all. I didn't put anything on the slide about it, but scrams also stop micro jump drives or bushes. So if we are fighting a battleship sized enemy, for example, lots of battleships will fit a micro jump drive on them so that they can move 100 kilometers. If you scram them, they can't do that. Same thing with a bush. Yeah, so if you see an enemy busher, if you just scram an enemy busher, their whole bush is ruined. Likewise, if a target is scrammed, it cannot be bushed. So we've had times with this where we were trying to bush something and it got scrammed and the whole fleet left, but the target we were trying to bush did not get bushed, so it stayed there. So if you hear your FC call for a bush, or if you hear that there's a friendly bush, turn off your scram. Don't scram the bush. I think I cover that later on too. Okay, heat. Heating, very useful skill to know about and something that we don't really cover anywhere else. You will hear people talk about heat a lot though. Heating or overheating is something that you can do to your active modules on a ship to make them more effective. If you heat your micro warp drive or afterburner, you will go faster. If you heat your guns, you will shoot faster. If you heat your point or scram, it will have longer range. If you heat your Ewar, it will apply stronger. So it makes all of your stuff better, basically. Heating anything will make it work better. To heat something, you need to train a skill. The skill is called thermodynamics. If you have just level 1 of the skill, you can overheat something. That's like a 10-minute train. So if you have not trained thermodynamics, train it now. It's worth it. There are other skills that will help you to be better at heating. I'm going to talk about that on the next point. But to heat things as a whole, it's pretty easy. There's a few different ways to heat something. You can shift-click the icon. You can click the little green bar at the top, or you can right-click on the icon and select Overload. So that little green bar that shows up above a module, if you just click your mouse right in there, then it will heat it. When a module is heated, you'll see it shows up this bright green. So in this example, I've heated my micro warp drive, but I have not heated my shield hardener. Once a module is used with heat, every time it's heated, there's a chance for damage to be applied. This chance of how much damage will be applied to it is affected by your thermodynamic skill, as well as a few other skills. There's a few skills related to heat. There's some that affect how you can repair it. Basically, when something is damaged, so in this example, I heated my shield hardener a few times and it shows up as 38% damaged. So now there's some red on the icon, and when I hover over it, I see this 38%. This still works. My shield hardener works fine. It works to full. I've stopped heating it. It's working. But if this damage hits 100, so if I heat this again and this gets up to 100, this module will stop working entirely. It will go offline. You might have been in fleets. You might have been this person. You might have just heard it from others, but there's always people that end up overheating their guns and burning their guns out. So then all their guns go offline and they can no longer shoot enemies, which is a big pain when it happens. So when you heat something, it will take damage. You want to stop heating before that damage hits 100. When you've got a second to catch your breath, you can repair it with nanite paste. So a question we get from new players a lot is, why is there nanite paste in this ship cargo hold? Like, what am I supposed to do with this paste? Nanite paste exists so that you can repair your heat damaged items. So if I'm in a fight, I was getting shot, so I overheated my hardener because I was getting shot. The fight's over, we won, hurrah. I don't like seeing this 38% damage. You can just right click on the module, and when you right click on it, there'll be a repair icon. And it'll tell you how much paste it'll cost. Depending on how you skill up, yeah, you'll get less likely chance to do heat damage. Your repair cost, so how much nanite paste it will take will change. How long it will take will change. So there are some skills you want to train there. But at the basics, Thermodynamics 1 will let you heat at least. Let's see. Ooh, bunch of questions. Okay. Question. Where can I see how much warp core stabilization a ship has? Yes, okay, thank you. There's an answer there. Yeah, so it only shows if it's more than one. So yes, if you look at the Venture, you can find it in the fittings there, but you will not see it by default on most ships. Assume it's one. Ooh, good question. Does leaving a space on guns affect heat when you fight a ship? Yes, so I don't have a slide on here for it, but basically heat spreads across a rack. So assume that we have a ship, and in our high slots we have 3 guns, 1, 2, and 3. If we separate our guns and we only heat number 2, it will still do damage to number 1 and 3 because they are right next to it. If we heat all 3, they're all getting hot, so the damage spreads quicker. So you will see some very advanced fittings at times people will mess around with, where they will, maybe if they have 4 hard points, they will stick a probe launcher in here and they will offline a probe launcher because that will stop the heat spread. You'll see this a lot with mid slots. So mid slots in the middle, this fit, for example. So in this fit, I have 2 active mid slots. I have a micro warp drive and I have a shield hardener. If I had that, let's say micro warp drive here, shield hardener here, I would put something else in the middle that is not active. So maybe in the middle, I'll put a large shield extender. Because this way, when the micro warp drive gets hot and the shield hardener get hot, they are not also getting extra heat from the LSC in the middle. This is getting a bit more into the weeds than I want to with it, but generally it's good to space things out. So if you have active modules that you might be heating, if you can just rearrange so that you have something else in the middle of them, that works good. I think there's one unifit that has an offline probe launcher between the guns for that exact reason too. There's a question there that I think this next point answers here. So once something hits 100% damaged, the module goes offline. When a module is fully damaged and offline, you cannot fix it with paste anymore. The only way to fix it is to actually repair. So you need to find a friendly structure that you can tether on, or you need to dock and repair, or maybe some advanced people will bring a mobile depot and a backup micro warp drive with them. So they will just anchor a mobile depot and then they'll switch which micro warp drive they have out in space. So yeah, as a whole, you want to heat things. Heating is good. Heat will make your shots hit harder. They will make you move faster. They will make your tank better. But if it hits 100%, then you're ruined. So don't let it hit 100%. And then when you've got a minute, take that and repair. There's a question. Well heating, do we need additional capacitor? That's a good question. So I don't think heating itself requires capacitor, but if you are heating guns and they are cycling faster, you are going to use more capacitor because each cycle of your gun's firing will happen quicker. So you're going to need more. You can see this when you simulate something. If you're in game and you're using the fitting window, when you simulate, if you click on something that's green, it will turn red. The red is you simulating it overheating. So if you simulate, go to overheat, you'll see maybe a fit that's cap stable normally is not when you are actually fully heating. Let's see, any other questions? Yeah, bombers are an example. So bombers, you can put some things in between. So yeah, in a bomber, you might have one torpedo, then you have your cloak here, then you have another torpedo, then you put like a probe launcher or fireworks here, and then you have your third torpedo. So that way the heat is spread out amongst three things. So yeah, there is a use for firework launchers there. There is a benefit to them. Okay, that's it for heat. Next thing I want to talk about is implants. So every uni fleet you go on, every time we're doing undock checks, you will hear your FC say, make sure you are in a clean clone. I say that every time. I want you to disregard that. I want you to forget that's a statement. Don't worry about clean clones. The word clean clone, you don't have to worry about it existing. When I say clean clone as an FC, what I mean is don't be in your training clone. Okay? There are a lot of implants out there that can be very helpful for very cheap. You can get 1% for under a million ISK of a lot of things. These can be very useful. They'll make your pod worth more than 10,000 ISK. I'm sorry. It might be worth 50,000 ISK instead of 10,000. Oh no. But a couple 1% implants can go a long way, depending on what they are. Some 1% you won't see a difference, but some. You can get implants that do extra damage for your guns. You can get ones that give you more speed, whether it's warping, whether it's micro warp drive or afterburner. You can get fitting ones. The fitting ones are a huge one. For example, our KSG Exec Navy, a very popular ship. Love to fly the Exec Navy, but if you don't have weapon upgrades 5, you're not going to be able to fit it fully without a 1% power grid implant, I believe. It might be CPU. But yes, there are implants you can get that will add 1% more power grid or CPU to your ship. So if you are looking at a fitting and it is showing red and it's saying like you're minus 0.1, you can get a 1% fitting and you can use that there. And then you can fly that ship. There's 2%, 3%, 5, 4, 5, 6, all that. I took a screenshot here just in GD yesterday just to show. So this is for small projectile turrets. But yeah, if you want 1% bonus damage, look at that. 500,000 ISK for 1% extra damage. 2%? Yeah, 5 million ISK. That's maybe cheaper than your ship still. Something going on weird with the pricing here because the 3% is cheaper, in fact. But yeah. So if you've got a little bit of extra ISK, take a look at implants. They can be useful. You don't always have to be in a clean clone. Use some 1%, use some 2%. When I go to Bomber's Bar Fleet, I have a torpedo head that does, like 3% extra missile damage. It cost me less than 10 million to get that, and it's a couple implants. Fitting wise, like I said, power grid, CPU, very easy to get those. So be aware of implants and don't be scared of clean clones. Okay. Oh, I accidentally scrolled up in chat. I didn't see all the new stuff. Okay. Did I miss some questions? And someone tagged me. Okay. I thought everyone was just being quiet, but nope. If we heat a gun but not actively use it, does it still get damaged? Yeah, that's a no to that. You have to actually use the module for it to get damaged. It might get damage from neighboring heat, but that's slower. Like I've had times that my shield hardener took damage, even though I wasn't using it. So like in this case, maybe I was heating my micro warp drive, but the heat spread to my shield. It's random chance. Every cycle of something heated, there's a random chance that it will heat it will do damage to the thing you're heating and to the neighboring ones. You can't really see it in the screenshot, but you can actually see heat levels here in your capacitor underneath your hull. There's kind of sections here and here and here for your highs, mids, and lows, and those show what the heat on the total rack is. So as you heat something for multiple cycles in a row, it gets hotter and hotter, and that chance goes up. There's a question, does the heat spread depend on where the models are fitted in the fitting window or where they are in space? Yeah, it's the fitting window. Moving stuff around in space doesn't matter. Moving your modules in space is all just personal preference. I like having my tank on the bottom and my speed in the middle. That doesn't do anything. But yeah, it's in the fitting window where you put them. Oh, yeah, preheating. I didn't talk about preheating, but you can preheat modules. So yeah, in this case, this module is preheated. So I have not started using my micro warp drive, but it is already preheated there. You can see by the green at top. You can also preheat things while you are in gate cloak. So if you jump gate and you see a bunch of enemies and you're thinking, oh no, I need to get away from them, shift click your micro warp drive, wait a second or two, wait until you see that green, and then you can start moving and turn it on and you will be preheated and you'll go faster right away. Oh, I like the idea of firework launchers on every ship. I'm all for that. I agree. Lots more questions. Yeah, implants. Yes, lots of very wonderful implants. I really recommend take a look, spend some time, use the browser to go through them, like look at the different types. There's implants that affect so many things. And yeah, even if you just have a head that's just 5 different 1% implants, it's going to cost you like 2-3 million ISK. And I like to think those 1% will make a difference. You never know. Filaments. So we're talking about flying your own ship. Filaments are something good to know about. I put these in my undock checks for every fleet, but I always just tell people if you know how to use them, bring them. If you don't know how to use them, don't worry about it, which is doing a disservice. So, very quick overview. A filament will take you out from where you are to a different spot in space. It is a random spot in space. It's decided by a few things. To use a filament, you must be in a fleet. Anyone with you in the fleet must be on grid with you within 6 kilometers, and you must all have no weapons timers. There's different types of filaments. The ones we use on our roams are generally needle jacks. 2 types of needle jack, signal and noise. These take us out to nullsec. A signal filament takes us somewhere busy. A noise filament takes us somewhere random in nullsec. You can think of it like signal to noise ratio, right? Noise like just general background chatter noise. Could be anywhere. Signals are where there's something happening. So when we are going out to PvP, we take a needlejack filament to somewhere in nullsec. When we want to go home, we usually go through the Pochvan Highway. There's a bunch of different Pochvan filaments. Pochvan is separated into 3 regions. There's a filament for each type of region. So there's Cry Velis, Cry Perun, and Cry something else. There are also home filaments if you want to go to home systems, or there are border or internal. There's lots of different ones in Pochvan. I'll give you some resources for that in a second. When you're in Pochvan, you can take something called a glorification filament that will take you to a random spot in high sec or low sec outside. Lots of times you'll see these in people's MOTDs, or you'll hear people recommend these. They are super cheap to get. I personally do not like glorification filaments. I don't like random. I don't like being like 10 jumps low sec when I come out of there. So personally, I don't think you should use glorifications. But if you do, that's good for you. The nicer one you can use there is a proximity filament. A proximity filament will take you to a region in space close to where this Pochvan one used to be. Bit of background on lore. Pochvan was something that came in a few years ago, maybe more than a few now. Basically, a bunch of high sec and low sec systems got taken out of normal space and pulled into spooky Triglavian space. But they still have connections to the areas they used to be in. So some of the ones that are near Caldari, if you use a proximity filament in Caldari, it will take you to Caldari space. You can also find wormholes that do the same thing. So generally, I always try to leave Pochvan through a wormhole. I try to have someone scan down a wormhole and go out through there. If you don't have that, or if those wormholes are camped, then you can use a proximity filament. Key thing to note is proximity filaments are a bit more expensive. They can cost 5 to 10 million per filament, whereas all the others are usually quite cheap. So if you don't mind spending a bit of money, proximity filaments work. I did talk about timers earlier. When you use a filament, you also get a timer. So using an exit filament from Podfin means you have to spend 15 minutes in Podfin doing nothing. So it does slow you down a bit. Ideally, if you want to get home, what you do is you take a filament to Podfin, you scan down a wormhole, you leave through that wormhole, you're home in a few minutes. There's a lot that can be said about this. I don't want to go into too much detail on it, so I will just say Scram taught a intermediate nullsec exploration class a few weeks or months ago, and it was wonderful, and he made a wonderful guide that is in PvP Study General, I believe. If you find that guide, he will show you exactly which filaments are best to use to get where and where. I will say, as a whole, I like JITA, and the border filaments to Podfin usually get you to a system close to JITA. So borders are my baby. I always buy borders. So I will finish a fleet, I will take a border filament, I will end up in Podfin, then I will try to scan down a wormhole from a border system, and that usually will get you to within 5 jumps of JITA. Usually. Yes, the Scram just shared the map there. So yeah, that shows you the different types of filaments where they will land you. There's a lot of randomness to it. And yeah, you can see the green systems are the good one for JITA. Thank you for sharing that, Scram. Great resource. One last thing to note with filaments is check the prices. So there's a number at the end of every filament. This is how many people it can take. So a border 15 can take 15 people. A border 5 could only take 5. However, markets don't make sense and weird stuff happens. Right now in JITA, the border 5s are more expensive than the border 15s. So it is not smart in any way to buy a border 5 filament right now. Buy a border 15 even if you're going solo. It's cheaper than a border 5. So check the prices. It's the same thing with needlejack filaments for any FCs or people going to nullsec. Sometimes the 15s are more expensive than the 25. So take a look at the different sizes. I think we're all caught up on questions. Yeah, we're looking good. Okay. So that was all the fly your own ship stuff. Oh, and that took almost an hour as is. These next sections are shorter, I will say. The bulk of my content was in there, but this class is probably going to go 20 minutes over time, just so you know. Intel. This is less about you flying your own ship and making your own decisions, staying alive, and this is more about providing value to the fleet and improving your learning as a pilot. To start, the number one thing I always recommend people do when you are in hostile space, as soon as you get into local, well, even before you're in that, you should have local chat somewhere on your screen. So if anyone has seen my UI before when I've streamed or my videos, I have 2 chat boxes. I have local chat in one area, and then I have my actual fleet chat and stuff in another. Local, you don't even need to care about the chat. You could collapse all this down. You could hide all this. You want to see the name list. You want to see the names of who's in local, how many people with you. So for example, in this case, I know that there's 22 other people in local because I am one of the 23. So put local chat somewhere on your screen. Whenever you enter a system, click in here, click on any name and press Control A. This will highlight all. What this does is this makes everyone's name show up blue like this. In this screenshot, you can see there were 23 people, but one is not highlighted. This means that this person is a new person. So since I have been in this local system with 22 people, at this point, this Darius guy has joined in. So lots of times you will hear people in chat say +1. When they say +1, what that means is there's one new person in system. This is a great thing to watch for enemy fleets coming in. Sometimes you'll see this just start spiking up. Sometimes you'll see like 5 names show up unhighlighted and you can say, oh, +5. It's also useful just to tell who the one new pilot was. So maybe you recognize some pilot names and you see one show up in there and you're like, oh, that pilot was flying Logi earlier, so we know there's a Logi here. Small digression. +1 has 2 meanings in Eve. You will also hear people talk about +1 as a verb. So they will say scouts go +1. When you hear someone say +1 as a verb, what they mean is to go ahead and look and be eyes in advance of the fleet. So It's very confusing at times, and you will hear even scouts and FCs get confused when someone says +1. Like, do you mean the scout is going ahead, or do you mean there's one extra new person in system with us? It can be confusing. But yeah, generally, if someone just says +1 with nothing else, what they mean is, hey, someone new is in system. Be careful. DScan. I'm not going to teach DScan here. Lobovaser teaches a DScan class here in uni. Wonderful class. Great theory. Great getting out in space and practice. Go to Lobovaser's class if you haven't been there yet. You should be watching DScan like a hawk, though. Unless local is empty or only friendly, you should always be watching DScan. Default key is V for it. I know some people rebind this to spacebar because they press it so much. But yeah, if you're in low sec, if you're in null sec, if you're in a wormhole, you should be pressing this every few seconds, honestly. It's something that sounds intimidating at first, but as you do it, you'll just get used to it. You just always keep an eye. You'll see if a ship pops up there, an enemy ship, just to know. You want to have that few seconds notice before something lands on you. You'll hear the phrase long D and short D, things like that. Those are not Unicom's terms. Don't worry about that. What that means is range. So long D is 14 AU, the max one. Short D can mean something like 1 AU or 5 AU. So sometimes you'll hear somebody reporting intel, and let's say, oh, we've got an enemy Thunderchild on long D. What they mean by that is that at max range D scan, you can see it, but it's not close to us. You might hear probes on short D. If you see combat probes on short D, that means that there are combat probes close to you. They might be finding you, so you got to be careful. I don't want to get into scouting too much either here. This isn't a scouting class, but if you are hunting and scouting, basically what you do is you set your D-scan to 5 degrees and you start looking at spots where a target could be. So you scan down the combat sites, or you scan down the ore sites, or the gates. If you are not someone that's hunting, if you're just hanging out in a fleet, you can just do 360-degree D-scans. Keep it at max. Just do those unless told otherwise. But yeah, as a whole, it's great as a fleet member just to be watching this intel. Keep an eye on local. Keep an eye on DScan because your FC and your scouts are distracted looking for content and they might not notice that there's been +2 in local and that there is now a claw on DScan that's coming towards us. So if you're just sitting in a fleet and you're bored, keep an eye. DScan around. Third-party maps. So we got a few different options for third-party maps. Dotlan and Evi are the popular ones. I personally use Dotlan, but I really want to learn Evi, and one of these days I will. It's got a lot more information. It's just a little bit more modern of a UI, let's say, whereas Dotlan looks like a site from the 90s and is nice and easy to use. But these are sites that will give you extra intel. So if you load these up on a second window, or if you're alt-tabbing back and forth, you can follow along on these maps. When you want to go from being a basic DPS line member to thinking about scouting or FCing, it's useful to start following along. So you pull up a map and you see where we are. Okay, so we're in this system and the FC has just told everyone to go to this system. Huh, okay, why? Or what's this path we're going to take there? There are some add-ons that will help with that. There's one, I think it's actually like a Chrome add-on that you install that will link with ESI and it will auto-track you on Dotlan. So your Dotlan page will refresh to show where you are. There's also a game overlay for Evi so that you can actually get the Evi map showing up over top of your Eve window so you can see the map in-game. I know Zolpadims used to use that a lot and it looked really cool when he would show it. There's a question. Do you recommend we go to local instead of fleet chat on fleets? Okay, so that's going back to the last slide, or 2 slides back. What I recommend for that is you have both open. One sec, I don't have the game open right now. I will get the game launching in the background. I'll show you my UI in a minute to show you what it looks like. But yes, I would recommend you have both local and fleet chat open. But yes, whether you like Dotland, whether you like Evi, they're both useful to have. You can also use the in-game map, but the in-game map can be a little harder to grasp with the 3D space and with limited stuff and so much information. But yes, I would recommend that you get used to using either Evi or Dotland, just so that you can really see where you are, where you're going, what's happening there. You will hear your FCs and scouts talk about the term delta. You might hear them talk about systems being green or red as well. This is NPC kills delta. This is the filter that we use on .lan, for example, when we're hunting ratters. So I just linked in the classroom chat there the map for Tribute with the delta selected. What this does is this will show you what systems there's been more NPCs being killed in the last 2 hours than the 2 hours before it. So when you see a green system on the delta map, what that means is that in the last 2 hours, there's been more ratting there than there was 4 hours ago. So that's probably a good sign that there's some activity happening there. Now, that's not a guarantee in any way. People might move systems. There might have been no ratting 4 hours ago, and now there's some now, or it's not a perfect system. But generally, when we are hunting ratters, we look at delta. So if you hear people talk about delta, that's what they're looking for. What else do we have here? Yeah, if you listen to the scouts and follow along with what the scouts and FC are doing, you'll really start to piece together the plan as a whole. I know for a lot of my first fleets, I was lost with so much of what was going on, and I just listened for the FT to tell me what to align to and what to jump. You will become a better Eve player as you practice more and you listen and you see, okay, so we're going from this system to this system. We're going to do this. This is why we're going here. This is the plan. That will help you out a lot. Okay, do I have... Okay, before we go into that next one, I will show my game slide. One sec here. Let me just see. Okay. Oh, I have it nice and censored because I'm in my streamer mode. One sec. Let me hide some stuff. Okay, so this is the UI that I use when I'm out doing things. I have my local chat on the side, and then I have my main chat with my fleet chat here. So I actually have two windows open at all times when I'm playing. So local chat is used for intel. I'm in Jita right now, so there's 1,700 people here. So it's rough. Yeah, I do 90% UI, so it's all very shrunken down here. It might not be the easiest to see. Like I said, though, key thing with local chat is the people. You don't even have to care about what they're saying. So if you want to just cramp that down and hide that and just look at the locals, that's fine. But yeah, so I use fleet chat here in this window for talking, and then I use this window for intel. So yeah, I would control A when I get into a system. This all gets highlighted. And then, oh, look, +1, this A-019 guy just came into local. So that's what I do there. Oh, thank you, Kodo. How nice. Thank you. Okay. So yes, I really recommend to have local and this. I put some chat tabs that I don't check up here. So like I have my Alliance one here because I never check Alliance chat. And I'm sorry for people that use the Skillbook program. I don't really check Corp chat much either. I'm sorry. But yes, unused tabs I put up here, and then the chat I have another. You can do this in a lot of different ways. I've seen people put their local off on one side and their chat at another. But my big recommendation would be have two chat windows. Have a window for chatting and have a window that is just for local intel so that you can see who's in local. And yes, this is being recorded, so thank you for those strippers there, Kodo, but that's okay. Let's go back to the slides. Okay, a couple other little things to know about. Who is Ewaring me? So, little thing that's useful to know is that when you are being tackled by something, you can actually see who is tackling you or who is using the Ewar on you by hovering your mouse cursor over it. So when you are tackled and something's stopping you from warping, if you just go and put your mouse over the icon, you will see exactly who it is. This is very useful to know if there's a bunch of enemy ships, but you have a chance of escaping and you just need to push off one that's attacking you. So you can lock that up. You can also control click the icon and it will lock that person up too. So this is very useful if you are only being tackled by one or two things or some Ewar is really annoying you. If you just hold control and you click your debuffs, you'll lock up whoever those are and you can shoot them and get them away. You can also find it on the overview. So if you look at the overview, there'll be a little icon at the far right side by default with the little one there. So in this case, the jewel was pointing me, but you'll also see jams show up here. You'll see paints show up here. You'll see other Ewar show up here. So you can see that. So these are good ways to know which enemy is actually doing these things to you so that you can try to kill them. It's a good thing too. when you're in maybe some smaller fleets or when you're in something where it matters and you're talking to people and you say, oh, FC, I'm tackled, it's good to say by who. I will admit, I do this even now. When I'm flying with way better pilots than I am, they'll say like, oh, is anyone tackled? And I say, oh, Tomlin's tackled. They're like, okay, well, what's tackling you, Tomlin? And I'll have to say, oh, it's the Heron tackling me. So it's really useful if you are tackled or Eward, if you can share that intel so that people know. Again, if you're in a fleet of 50 people and it's a big fight and stuff's just happening, you probably shouldn't be interrupting combat comms to say this. But if you're on your own and you're trying to just push off one thing, or if you're in a small gang, really useful to be able to say, this person is the one that's aggressing me right now. You know, it's the Heron, please shoot the Heron. And yes, it's a very tiny overview icon, but you'll see, especially if you've got a bunch of things shooting you, if you look, you'll see a lot of different colors and icons there. Oh, I went back for some reason. Other ones, zoom out. So I know we have pretty spaceships. I know we have pretty spaceship games and skins, and we spend a lot of money on all that. But a big thing I would recommend is zooming out when you are playing. By zooming out more, you get to see more of the grid and you can really think a lot more tactically. Zooming in can be useful, of course, to see some little details, but the more you zoom out and look at the grid as a whole and you see enemy ships coming from different directions, the more things will start to make sense and you can start to think, where should you go next? You know, maybe there's an enemy coming around the back line that you wouldn't have seen if you weren't looking at a certain angle. So being zoomed out and looking around, very useful. The tactical overlay, very helpful here. Tactical overlay will show distances, it will show people's angulars that they're moving at, it will really help you there. There is an option, it's not just all brackets in space, it's show names in space. It's a small game thing. You change something in the game setting files and it will make everyone's names show up out in space for you. It's really helpful when you're doing small gang stuff. I like to play with it on, but it also gets very annoying in giant fleet stuff because everything just becomes a blob. So for example, here's a screenshot I took from an ops fleet I was on last month. So as you can see, every single ship has the name of the pilot, the name of the ship around it. So I can quickly look and see like, oh, look, this Loki is way out of position away from the other Lokis up here. Or, oh, these arms are kind of far away from their people. But because these brackets are messy, you also get this mess here where you can't even tell what's going on. There's a bunch of stuff on top of each other. Yeah, so small gang brackets are nice. There's a guide pinned in PvP Study General to show how to do it. You just open up a game config file and you change a line. It's perfectly legal. CCP's on board with it. Don't worry, you're not breaking any terms. I just wish that there was a way to turn it off and on in game because yeah, when you are out in a busy area, like if you're in one of the big Amazon fights with hundreds of people, it just looks messy. But yeah, I would recommend turning it on if you're doing small gang stuff because it's so useful to be able to see. You can edit what you see as well. So for example, I like to know the alliances of people. So I usually I have the ship, the alliance, and the name of the pilot. If you don't care about pilot names or alliances, you can hide those and just have ship names, which will be much cleaner, honestly. Yeah, very useful to have all that extra intel, I find. Okay, that's intel. Special roles. We got a few different specific roles to talk about. DPS. Honestly, most of what I've already talked about is about DPS. A lot of what I've talked about doesn't apply to Logi. Some does, like bouncing and things. But DPS, most of what I've covered applies to you. But a few specific things for DPS. Defanging. You will hear FC's call to defang at times. What defanging means is kill the enemy drones. So maybe we're fighting a big enemy ship that's super tanky, but it can't do a whole lot of damage. Most of its damage is coming from its drones. So we just decide to kill its drones. So if you hear a call for defang, that means kill drones. You can do this from your overview. I like to have a tab on my overview that only shows enemy drones. So I use that. You can do it from locking them in space. You can do it a few different ways. But yeah, if you hear defang, that means kill drones. Smart bombs. Smart bombs are something we run into a lot on Uni fleets. Smart bombs are an AoE damage that comes out of a ship. It's usually battleships that will have them. Quite often we run into smart bombing Praxis, for example. You'll see it on Marauders and such too, and you'll see it on bigger ships. There was that video posted in, was it alumni or Killboard discussion? There was a video posted even of a smart bombing facts the other day. So a big capital ship with smart bombs killing a bunch of Kikimoras. Smart bombs are very annoying if you're in a small ship, but they have limited range. If you are in a brawling ship, when I say brawling, I mean close range fighting. So something like our Merlins or our AAFs. If you're in one of those, smart bombs are the death of you. If you're just orbiting an enemy at 500 and they start smart bombing, you will die. So you need to be able to react quick. If you see a smart bomb happening, if you're taking damage from it, you want to orbit further out. Most smart bombs, if they are not faction, will not hit you at 7,500. So if you orbit at 7,500 meters, most of the time you will be okay. If they're fancy smart bombs, they might hit you at that, and you might have to orbit at 10 kilometers. But yeah, as a whole, if you are in a brawling ship and the enemy starts smart bombing, you need to get some distance. Don't stay on top of the enemy. Don't try and orbit 500. FCs usually will call for this. They will tell you this, but sometimes the FC might not notice or they might be slow to react. So don't be afraid to fly your own ship here and orbit further away from enemies that are smart bombing. If there's multiple enemy smart bomb ships, then you might have to do some manual piloting to make sure you're 7,500 from both of them. But yeah, as a whole, if you're in a DPS ship, don't get close to smart bombers. I did not include a picture or a GIF here, but smart bombs kind of look like an explosion happening from the ship itself. You can probably find some videos. If you watch that video that Kodo linked in the chat there, that will show you some smart bombs from the lift. Secondaries as well. So if you've been in a fight where things are happening, when tackle is on something, so when our scouts grab something, lots of times they will ask for a secondary. What they mean here is they need somebody else to point the target. So let's say we're in a fleet. Our malediction went ahead. Our malediction has tackled an Ishtar, but they see other things they want to go hunt, or they're about to die because the Ishtar drones are killing them. They'll say, somebody call secondary. What they mean by secondary here is get secondary tackle. So if you are in a Merlin, or you are in a Retribution, or you're in anything that has a point on it, if you can get a second point on it, that will make the scout's job a lot easier, because then the scout can go do other things. So you'll hear this sometimes. We will tackle something, the fleet will land, and then you'll hear somebody on comms just say secondary. When they say secondary, what they mean is there is a secondary tackle. Scout, you are good to leave. You can go do other things. So yeah, if you have a point on your ship, if you can point a target that the scout has pointed, and you can let them know, they will be so grateful because now they can do other things. I talked about heat earlier, but yes, please don't burn out your guns. DPS ships burning out their guns is so painful because that's your whole point. Once your guns are gone, you're kind of useless. So you're nothing but a target after that. So yes, manage your heat on your guns. Same thing with your micro warp drive. Don't burn out your micro warp drive or else you're going to go very slow and have trouble. I talked about it earlier with Scrams, but yes, if we have a Boosher with us, and if there is a call made to Boosh, do not Scram things, because Scrams will stop the point, or stop the Boosh. Pointing is okay. Keep your point, the long range one, keep that on them, but not the Scram. If an enemy ship is trying to Boosh you, and you Scram that Boosher, oh, you'll be a hero. That's wonderful. But for a friendly one, don't do it. And I think that's it for DPS. Logi. So, Logi, a lot of fun. The healers of the fleet, again, Logi are the ones that keep people alive. A couple extra little tips for Logi. When you have a watch list set up and people are being shot, their names will flash. I did not make a GIF of this, but as you can see on this, there are some red names. These are names that were being shot at the time I took the screenshot, or they had just recently been shot. So as Logi, I have my whole fleet on watch list, and I can see right away, Jonathan and Goran and Clarities are being shot. And poor Benin already got shot, but no, that wasn't my fault he died. No. So as a whole, when you're Logi, you want to have the whole fleet on your watch list if you can fit them. At least have the special people so that you can see and look for that. We tell people to broadcast when they're being shot. As Logi, you should have the broadcast window open and watch for broadcasts. But some people will be so busy that they forget to broadcast, or they won't notice they're being shot in time to broadcast. So as Logi, keep an eye, look for flash names, lock them up, heal them. Important thing to know as Logi is the difference between shield and armor Logi. When you are flying a shield Logi ship, like a Burst or an Osprey or a Basilisk, as soon as you use that module, it will give some shield to the person you're healing, and then the cycle will start, it'll go 5 seconds, then it'll do it again. So they get that heal instantly. If you're flying armor Logi, so if you're in something like an Inquisitor or an Augurer or a Guardian, that heals at the end of the cycle. So with armor, you press the button to heal and you wait the 5 or 6 seconds as it spins, and they get the heal at the very end of that cycle. So it is harder to do Logi as armor because you have to react quicker. If you start when somebody's in half armor and they're dead by the time your rep lands, you're out of luck there. Shield Logi, you can react a bit slower and still catch people. Armor Logi, you have to start a little earlier. You have to predict damage or hope they can tank through it for a bit. A very good tip to know for Logi, this is one I don't see talked about a lot, is how important it is to stagger reps. So in this screenshot down here, if you look, I've got 4 shield reps going, but look at where they are in the cycle. This one's about 3/4, this one just started, this one's 2/3, this one's like a third. I have staggered these, so I made sure I pressed them at different times. This way, this person is getting healed in waves. Instead of going from no shield, no shield, no shield, 10,000 shield, they're getting a steady 2,000 shield, 2,000 shield, 2,000 shield. This is much more helpful to make sure that people are steadily getting healed up and that you are not overhealing, right? You're not going way more healing than they need. You're spacing it out. So if the DPS on them is spaced out, you are spacing out the healing. It's a little easier on cap because you're not hitting your cap all at once. It's a little spread out as well. If things hit the fan, if it's going crazy and you hit all your reps at once, that's fine. But as a whole, if you can space it out so that your reps are hitting a few seconds apart, it's much better for your healing per second that's going out and preserving your cap. Don't focus solely on managing this, really. Your job is to keep people alive. But yeah, if you can, staggering reps helps a lot more. And this is true for small Logi or big Logi. You can heal, or you can overheat as well. I'm not sure if I mentioned it on the heating slide earlier, but you can heat your reps and they will work faster. So you can get more reps out if you heat them. Okay, quick check of the chat. No questions there. Okay, good, good. I think I have one more slide, I think here. Ewar. Not a lot to say about Ewar, but just to note that range is your tank for Ewar. So most Ewar ships are very squishy. And the way Ewar is set up is that Ewar frigates that we fly a lot of in the uni, they are actually fairly strong. So even if you're flying larger ships as a group, Ewar frigates can still have a very useful spot in your group. So since we're flying frigates, they will melt if they get hit by like anything. So with Ewar, you want to be far away. A lot of Ewar modules will work at 100 kilometers if you have the skills for it. They might work, they might work at 80 kilometers or 150, depending on your skills. When you're flying Ewar, you want to be as far from the enemy as possible. So the rest of the fleet might be fighting the enemy at 0, but as Ewar, you want to be 100 kilometers away so that you're just too far and the enemy can't shoot you. If you want to get advanced with this, if you know that you're about to warp into a fight, if your FC is warping to a fight at 0, you could cancel that and you could warp yourself at 50 kilometers or at 100 kilometers. This is something true for KSG as well if you're flying kiting ships. But yeah, you don't always have to go along at 0 on the warps. If you are in an Ewar ship and you land in a fight at 0, your first goal should be getting out of there. So you should turn on your micro warp drive and just burn away from the enemies. Try to get 100 kilometers away from the enemies while you're disrupting them. Question, would that require a keep at? I would not use the keep at range command. You could, I guess, but if there's only one enemy ship, I guess you could use keep at range. But I would do this more manually. Generally, there's a bunch of enemy ships, so I would zoom out. Again, I would do that zoom out, and I would look. Okay, the enemy fleet is. One sec, let me get my pen back here. So if the enemy fleet is all over here, and my fleet's all right here, and this is maybe, let's say, 20 kilometers, I would burn away from my fleet, and I would go so that I'm way out here. So I'm 80 kilometers away. So then I've got my fleet between me to protect me, and I can sit there and I can do my Ewar magic to the enemy over there. Yeah, if the fleet is big enough, there could be an Ewar anchor. Yes, this was something we talked about after one of our last strat ops, was that we needed an Ewar anchor. Because yes, if you're in an Ewar frigate, like a Crucifier or a Maulus, you do not want to be close to enemies. But if you're in a Merlin or a Punisher or a Retribution or a Crucifier or Navy, you want to be close to the enemies. So yeah, flying Ewar is a little tricky because you have to make sure you are away from enemies. You manually fly further out. It's harder, but it's so much fun. When you hit some Ewar, when it lands well and cripples the enemy fleet, oh, it's so good. So Ewar, super useful thing to do, but it does take that little bit of managing your distance. You can do it through bookmarks as well. So a lot of Ewar pilots will make some bookmarks as they're fighting or setting up for a fight. So they'll make their own tactical bookmarks so that they can bounce around. Peak Ewar gameplay requires a lot of warping around. So we had this for one of the strat ops we did in 2023. Not this summer, we didn't try it this time, but in 2023 there was one strat op where we took our entire fleet in Griffins. And we had our structure. So if this is our structure, we had bookmarks. Oh, I want to make dots, but the pen tool doesn't like it. We have bookmarks all around our structure. So what we did, we got in a bunch of Griffins, and we would just warp to one of these bookmarks. We'd target an enemy. We would jam the enemy, and then we warp to another bookmark. So if there's an enemy sitting right here, I would warp to this bookmark. I would jam him with all my jams, and then I would warp over here. And then I would jam him again from here. And then I would warp over here, and I'd jam him from here. It was very much more advanced and involved and fancy gameplay, but oh, it was so nice. So when you're flying Ewar, you want to be bouncing around, especially if you're against enemies that can shoot you at long range. So if you're in a Crucifier and you're fighting against a Vargur that can shoot at the range you're using, you might need to actually warp around a bit. I talked about bouncing earlier. As Ewar, bouncing is super important. It's best if you can bounce on grid to some tacticals, but if you just bounce off grid, then come back, that's fine too. So I flew Ewar in a fleet last week, and at one point I had to bounce, so I just warped out, and then I warped back to a fleet mate at 100 kilometers. So when I landed, I was like 150 off the enemy. I could position myself how I needed. Yeah, takeaway from this slide. As Ewar, make sure you're staying far away from enemies, and do what you need to do that. You don't have to anchor on the FC or follow them on their warps. Okay, and that comes to the end of it all. I wanted to have like a good summary, but like I said, this class was kind of a selection of a bunch of random facts and tips and tricks. So I don't have anything I can summarize for you from all of this class. I covered a lot of different stuff. I know there was a lot of information in here across a wide variety. Like I said, I did record this, so I will share the recording later. But yeah, I guess my big summary is the more you do all this, the easier it gets. Descanning every few seconds sounds annoying and hard until you're sitting out in space bored and you're just hitting V without realizing it. Bouncing sounds complicated. Making a safe sounds complicated. Do them a few times, they're so easy. Let's see, any questions? I see some stuff about Ewar, some small gang stuff, yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna move to the Q&A part, and I'm gonna quickly find the class feedback form to link in here. But yeah, let's have a few minutes of Q&A. I'm sure there's, like I said, there's a lot of stuff covered, so anything you want to touch on there, I'm happy to discuss. So we have a question. I see some of Mars ships are quite tanky for Ewar, Arbitrator, Curse. Are they the exception? Yeah, so those are getting a bit more advanced. Ewar is a priority target for any enemy pilot. So when we are deciding who to shoot first, I will always prioritize killing Ewar because Ewar is just going to ruin anyone's day. So flying something like the Curse is super useful, but it would take a higher level of pilot skill, I would say, just because of that risk. So a Curse will have to fight a little closer than those ships. Francie and I actually just like 2 hours ago, France and I were looking at the Curse together and looking at some distances it can nude at and such. And great ship, With Recon 5, you can nuke people at, I think it was like 40 kilometers, which is outside their point range. But still, with a curse, you are going to have to get a little closer into fighting range, so you are more at risk. So flying something like that is great. I would not recommend it to learn on. I would say hone your skills as an Ewar pilot in longer range ships before you get into closer range, because everyone and their mother will be trying to kill you. But yeah, Ewar is amazing. It's just you have to know that you are the enemy's priority to kill, so you've got to rely on that range to keep you alive, or fancy piloting if you can do that. Just in case anyone doesn't know, the e-warships we have in the Uni flight deck there, they are free in staging. So there might still be some in Stackman now. There's probably some up in Korsiki. But yes, they are free and they fit with any doctrine. So if we're flying Merlins, if we're flying AAF, if we're flying KSG, if we're flying Omens, whatever the rest of the fleet's flying, you can come in a flight deck e-war ship and you will be of great use. And yeah, they're super cheap. Like even if you have to buy it in GD, it's like a million ISK you're going to pay for that ship. And the utility you bring for that, so wonderful. And yeah, thank you all for coming today.